One of the reasons I chose to be a Christian was how God revealed himself to me while I was in college. I needed 3 electives towards my degree, and I chose kind of at random 3 classes. One was the Old Testament as literature, another was the history of the Old Testament, and finally, biblical archaeology. I thought that there would be some overlap. Now, these were taught by different professors in different departments. But what was interesting is I would study in one section, in one class, and then later in the other class, I would see where that was fulfilled. And again, this was in a secular college setting. One of the things that caught my attention was in the writings of Isaiah, where King Cyrus was specifically mentioned 150 years before he was born. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, which is also recorded in Scripture, how it was going to take place, and it's specifically, it's very clear that Cyrus interacted with Daniel, and one of the reasons that Jerusalem's temple could be rebuilt was the fact that Cyrus was probably influenced by the scroll of Isaiah. Josephus, who's not always a trustworthy historian, sometimes he gets caught up with enthusiasm and embellishes things, does record that King Cyrus actually read this prophecy about himself. In that prophecy of Isaiah, it's found in chapters 44 and 45. Now, the critics would like to say that this was written long after Cyrus lived and by another author. But how could King Cyrus read about himself? That's a question that I had at the time. What cannot easily be explained is why Cyrus was so benevolent and enthusiastic about releasing the Jews. After reading Isaiah's prophecy, it makes total sense that he was going to be amazed by this and make the decision for the rebuild of the temple in Jerusalem. How did Cyrus gain access to Isaiah's prophecy? I don't know the specifics, I don't remember, but we do know that King Cyrus knew the prophet Daniel well, and Daniel was well-versed in Isaiah's prophecies and probably owned a copy of Isaiah's text. And Daniel lived in Babylon, and after Cyrus took Babylon and tackled the Babylonian Empire, Daniel became a high-ranking official in Cyrus' Medo-Persian Empire, in which Daniel had access to Cyrus. Critics of the Bible totally despise Isaiah 44 and 45. They have tried over the last couple centuries to have numerous theories about why this was written after the fact, and that there was no way that there could be a supernatural prophetic event written about King Cyrus. Well, the whole point of these critics was that the book of Isaiah has multiple authors, and some parts of the book, mainly the later chapters, were written on a different time and much later than the first part of the book. According to this theory, the book of Isaiah was compiled into a single book around 70 BC. But let's talk about this. The book was already a complete canonical work, and copies of it go back in some of the findings in the Qumran caves to 200 BC. And the fact that it was already considered canonical by that time shows that it probably had a much earlier date. The same can be said about the writings of Daniel. There have been a number of books that have influenced me early on. One of them was Daniel in the Critic's Den by Josh McDowell. But I want to say this, is history is proving, and archaeology is proving the accuracy of the history of the Bible. On the Elephantine papyri discovered in the Qumran caves, there was a codic, a coding method that the scribes used on what was considered canonical, and how careful they were to use this numerical formula to check the accuracy of a scripture. They were doing this with Daniel, probably 200 BC, and not only that, there were 8 other parts of Daniel that were found throughout the cave, showing that they had canonical status and were widely circulated. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls are so important because the critics wanted to say that Daniel, because of its specific prophecies, was written as late as 400 AD. One of the interesting things about the book of Daniel, as scholars are digging into more, supported by more archaeology and history, is they're finding that the terms written in Daniel are a very early and ancient form of Aramaic. Also, the critics used to point out that there were Greek words contained in the book of Daniel. History and archaeology are also showing that those Greek words are all musical instruments that could have been used in the court, in Babylon, and then later in Cyrus's time. So the point is there was already trade going on, and one of the most commonly traded things were musical instruments. So, again, history, archaeology is proving the critics that so want to post-date and tear up the book of Daniel. They have no room for the supernatural or the hand of God. But again, the Dead Sea Scrolls are so pivotal in showing that as early as 200 BC, the book of Daniel was already considered canonical. In my research for the next video that I'm working on, I've been studying the writings of Flavius Josephus, and I'm going to be covering the famous event where Alexander the Great came to Jerusalem, but I don't want to get into the specifics of that video yet. It's a fantastic story. The introduction that I found in multiple places says this: most scholars agree that the following story told by historian Flavius Josephus in his Jewish Antiquities is not true. One of the chief arguments is that Alexander is shown a book that was not yet written. Okay, let's talk about that. That is an example of intellectual deception. In the history of the nation Israel, Daniel took place about 540 to 530 BC, or in scholarly terms, BCE. But I want to mention that archaeology has proven that this idea that Daniel wasn't written until 162 BC is just a total crock. I mean, let's call it's actual trying to explain away the supernatural move of God that occurred in the writing of Daniel. And let's explain that in the findings at the Qumran caves, Daniel was the third most common scroll fragment found. It still had all the codexing done on something that was accepted as part of the canon. And again, it was one of the most common fragments found. And those go back 200 BC or 200 BCE, whichever term you want to use. And the fact that it was already accepted as canon meant that it was probably much more ancient than that. Quoting from BibleReadingArchaeology.com, there really is no reason to disbelieve Josephus' account unless one has a previous commitment to the now discredited late-date theory of Daniel. Again, I want to repeat that. Really, there's no reason to disbelieve Josephus' account unless one has a previous commitment to the now discredited late-date theory of Daniel. As I said in this video, archaeology has a way of now showing that the Bible is accurate. It was written when it was supposed to be written by the author that it was written by. And all these higher critics that have tried to destroy the works of Isaiah and the writings of Daniel by saying they were written at much later dates by multiple authors, archaeology's showing with intact scrolls that these were actually written when they were supposed to be written, and they're authentic and legitimate, and we can have faith in the Bible.